The next tissue we will be working on is muscle tissue. Of course, we all know about muscle tissue. Muscle moves our bones for us. There are three types of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and visceral or smooth muscle. Here they are on the left: skeletal, cardiac, and visceral or smooth muscle. Let's start with skeletal muscle. Of course, skeletal muscle moves the bones. And let's get to know some of the parts of skeletal muscle. When you really break it down, what you see is, number one, that the interesting thing, this is a muscle cell right here. You can see how long it is. It can be up to, say, 30 centimeters long. But notice how there are nuclei, multiple nuclei. We talked about if it's a cell, it has to have a nucleus, right? Skeletal muscle cells are what we call multinucleated. And I know this is a bad drawing, but there's a nucleus right there. I've expanded for us. And notice that there's a nucleus right here. There's a nucleus right here. It's just not the typical cell shape. Previously, we had learned, we use this model where a cell looked like this, and the nucleus was in the middle. Well, these just happen to be long-shaped cells. Multinucleated, meaning for every muscle cell, there are many, many nuclei. So a muscle cell is multinucleated. And recall that the cells we've learned about, this is called a cell membrane. Well, the funny shaped muscle cell, the membrane along the outside has a different name. It's called not a cell membrane, but in muscle it's called sarcolemma. And inside here, when we learned about the cell, we called this the cytoplasm. Well, in muscle, this area in here that extends all the way along there, this area is called the sarcoplasm. Sarc means flesh. And here's the explanation of just that. The cytoplasm in muscle is called sarcoplasm, and the cell membrane of a muscle cell is called the sarcolemma. Muscles require a lot of energy, as you recall. And recall that the structure that provided in the cell that provided energy was called a mitochondria. Mitochondria. And within it's hard to see in this diagram, but there are mitochondria floating around, probably not floating along in here, because muscles require so much energy for contraction. And these little energy factories in the cell, and muscles have plenty of them for energy. Also, the muscle needs blood. All muscle needs blood for fluids, for oxygen, etc., for nutrients. And so these are the capillaries right here. These are the blood vessels, the capillary network that runs in between muscle cells, supplying with oxygen and other nutrients. So the muscle you see here, the biceps muscle, for example, consists of many strands of these bundles. You see the cells bundled together into greater groups and greater groups that wind up, and they attach to these tendons right here. And when it contracts or shortens, if this muscle belly shortens, becomes smaller or shorter inward, this arm will come forward like this. And inside these cells, these muscle cells, are the contractile elements, which we will learn more about when we talk about muscles. But just know that these are very long cells, multinucleated, many nuclei, mitochondria inside, blood vessels, sarcolemma on the outside, and then sarcoplasm on the inside. Here you go, sarcolemma, that's the membrane on the outside. Of course, each muscles are made up of cells, long muscle cells with many nuclei. Of course, what's missing in this diagram here is the nerves. The nerves, see, muscle can't contract by itself. This action cannot contract alone. It has to have a signal. The signal comes from the brain. The brain, through the spinal cord, sends nerves down that attach to the muscle. So these neurons, they're actually nerve cells called neurons, come in here, and they send messages from the brain that tell it to contract. So it has to come from the brain, or sometimes it doesn't come from the brain. When you go to the doctor and he taps your knee, it happens automatically. That's a reaction. It's an arc. It's a reflex that comes through the spinal cord, and it's not in your conscious control. But in any case, there need to be nerves going to the muscles to tell them to contract. Cardiac muscle is similar to skeletal muscle, but it is similar in that it also has a sarcolemma, around each muscle cell. But curiously, it does not have as many nuclei or cell nuclei. It has one or two, but not a whole lot. And of course, it has a sarcoplasm in here. The contractions of the heart are very rhythmic, as you know, and they are not under your conscious control. For example, you with your brain here, you cannot, that's an awful brain, you cannot tell your heart to contract faster or slower. It happens automatically. It actually happens in an area of the spinal cord down in here that controls the autonomic nervous system. So these things, the contractions happen automatically. Cardiac muscle cells connect. Here's the muscle cell. They're long, not as long as skeletal muscle cells, but they connect in what's different about them from cardiac, they connect in this place, in this area right here, that's called the intercalated disc. We've talked about the type of muscle that contracts and moves your arm, for example. We've talked about the type of muscle that causes your heart to beat and pump. But there's another type of muscle. It's called smooth muscle. And smooth muscle is found in your GI tract. For example, your intestines, your colon. Also the sphincters of your body. Your anal sphincter, your gastric sphincters around your stomach area, etc. But there are areas that contract and shut off certain areas, like around here, to keep the fluid or whatever's inside here, the feces, from going out. And again, like cardiac muscle, these smooth muscles are not under your control of your brain. You cannot tell your colon to stop contracting. The signals come from a lower part of the brain, and they're automatic. They're part of the autonomic nervous system. Same with cardiac up here. And of course, we can't call the cell membrane just a cell membrane, can we? In the cardiac world, it's called in the muscles, it's called a sarcolemma and sarcoplasm. Sarcolemma, sarcoplasm. Well, here, we're going to call this membrane a plasmalemma. Curious. This is just a general overview of muscle tissues. We will be learning more about each of them in their respective sections. When we talk about greater depth about muscles, we'll go more into these tissues and the functions and how they contract. And when we talk about organs and glands, we'll go into more depth on how they contract. And that completes this section on page 11 of Anatomy Coloring Book. I am Dr. Stephen Harkins.